Military involvement in the Democratic Republic of Congo has come under intense scrutiny. This is following the tragic deaths of 13 SANDF soldiers in clashes with M23 rebels. The ongoing conflict in eastern DRC raises serious concerns about whether South Africa's troops are adequately equipped and supported to face a well-armed rebel force like M23. Some critics argue that SANDF soldiers have been sent into a war zone without the necessary resources, and while calls for diplomatic intervention with Rwanda, who are allegedly backing the M23 rebels, are growing louder. Today, we'll be examining South Africa's military readiness, the geopolitical complexities, and what lies ahead for troops that are stationed in the Eastern DRC. And joining me now is independent security and defense analyst, Mr. Helmoed Römer Heitman, who will be providing much needed expert analysis on the situation. Mr. Helmoed, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Pleasure, anytime.
I think first and foremost, before we get to the nitty-gritties of the story, the question on almost all South Africans' lips is, given the recent deaths of the 13 SANDF soldiers in the DRC, is the SANDF adequately equipped? Are our forces ready and prepared to face M23 rebels? Are we on that level? Are we, still one of the most formidable militaries here on the continent?
We would be if all our equipment is functional and serviceable. But the limited funding has meant that a lot of stuff, most of the combat aircraft, the Navy ships for that matter, and quite a lot of Army equipment simply is not serviceable at the moment. So, for instance, the troops in the Congo have no air support. That's a problem. It would have been difficult out of Goma Airport anyway, but that's a major problem. We are lacking some capabilities, for instance, mortar locating radar. The M23 were using guided mortar bombs, which are exceedingly accurate, and we had no really good way of quickly finding out where that mortar was to shut it down. But more to the point, the deployment in the Congo was dolled up by the politicians as peacekeeping, when in fact, if you look at it, the definition, they were there to neutralize M23. That's not peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is if both sides have decided they want to settle and just don't trust each other a lot. We went in there, in effect, with a warfighting mission to defeat M23, so we can't really complain if they attack our troops. The problem is, because it was dolled as a peacekeeping mission, it seems that the South African contingent just moved into old MONUSCO bases, which are not well sited for defense, are not well prepared for defense. And I don't think anybody expected M23 and Rwanda, because they're Rwandan troops, so you can see them on TV, to actually attack Goma. They expected, small operations, guerrilla operations, overrun some small villages, mines, etc., as they have in the past. Having said that, of course, they did take Goma once before, but clearly nobody was prepared for that. And then, no matter how well trained our troops are, the other problem is that everything else seems to have evaporated around them. The Congo army evaporated, MONUSCO stood down. That left our guys pretty much standing on their own. And then they were grossly outnumbered. So it was just a combination of very bad factors. There may have been some leadership issues on the scene. I don't know. I wasn't there. The junior leaders seem to work pretty well. And everything I hear from friends in the Defense Force and people who used to be in the Defense Force, there's nothing much wrong with our troops. The problem is the equipment doesn't work. The problem is our politicians don't understand what is within the realm of the possible and what isn't.
And would this, agree with a sentiment that is shared by many that, our soldiers have ultimately, just been left hung out to dry? Do you believe that's the truth? Do you believe that the government almost underestimated the risks of this deployment?
I think so, yes. So there doesn't seem to be anywhere at cabinet level has any sort of grasp of what the military does and how it does it. I'm told, I don't know if it's true, I'm told that the chiefs of the Defense Force tried to talk the government out of this mission on the basis we didn't have the capabilities required, but we're told to get on with it. But we saw it also in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado. The SADC force that went in there was far too small for the job and also had no air support. We previously had that in Bangui in 2013, also no air support. And the early entry force, Special Forces Paras, were never relieved by an infantry battalion the way they should have been. After Bangui, the then Chief of Joint Operations, General Mgwebi, said flat out, we will never again deploy without our own air support, because you can't trust others. In Bangui, the Central African Force, FOMAC, stood aside. The Central African Army, much like the DRC Army now, pretty much evaporated. We were on our own. So that's why the Rooivalk originally went into the Congo and did very well against M23 at that time. But meanwhile, with the funding limits, they haven't been able to maintain the Rooivalk. They haven't been able to get standoff weapons for it. So the Rooivalk is currently not operational. And we took one unnecessary casualty in Mozambique as a result of not having an attack helicopter to protect them during a casualty evacuation. And now we have this situation. Just how much air support would have helped if you totally misjudged the situation and don't expect a major attack that then happens, I'm not sure. But certainly let's take a big if I may. If we had started implementing the 2015 defense review, we would now have had the airlift and the weapons necessary to say, fly into the Congo, secure the airport north of Bukavu, which is 150 or so kilometers south of Goma, establish an airhead there, and then either overland or go down to Bukavu port and use boats and arm them to go and get our people out of Goma. We could have done that. Even if we just had operational serviceable what we currently own, the few Hercules we own and the Gripens, if they had weapons were serviceable, we could do something. It'd be more risky, but we could do something. But as a result of not having had money to maintain equipment, there's really nothing much we can do except keep our fingers crossed.
And
again, I want to say, I'm not worried about the troops on the ground, but I'm worried for them. I'm not worried about their skills, their abilities. There'll be the odd dud among them. That's always the case. But the clips we've seen, the junior leaders seem to know what they're doing. They're doing it well. They're keeping their heads. They're not flapping. In fact, none of our troops seem to be flapping. They're under pressure, but they're doing their job.
And I think that's great to hear. And I think, they need to be commended for that, given, the current circumstances that they are dealing under. I want to touch a bit on the M23 rebels. They've been gaining ground rapidly. I think in the last 2 weeks, as you mentioned, they are now have taken over Goma. How formidable is this group in terms of weaponry, strategy, and just external backing? Anything that you know about them, and just how much of a threat they are? I mean, 13 casualties, for a whole national defense force when they're just touted to be, ground rebels.
Look, not just M23. Rebels over much of Africa now are a whole lot more dangerous than they were, say, in the 1960s when Mike Hawke could go to the Congo as mercenaries and beat them up. Rebels today are better armed, better trained, better led. Often the leaders are often former regular army officers. M23 in its original incarnation, the CNDP, was already a pretty dangerous organization. It became a lot more dangerous. They were taken by surprise when we deployed the Rooivalk last time round. And the South African Battalion was much more aggressive than any other peacekeeping forces, peacekeeping in quotes, had been. So they were defeated and driven out and ran into Congo and Rwanda. To Uganda and Rwanda. In the meantime, however, they've been training up, and it was pretty clear that the Rwandan army has been training them. And the Rwandan army is probably Africa's answer to the Prussian army of 2 centuries ago. They are very professional, they're very serious, and they're very experienced. M23 too, a lot of their commanders have been around forever. And this is something we tend to overlook, particularly down in South Africa. A lot of guerrilla groups, that applies to M23, it also applies to Allied Democratic Forces that are wanting to fight in Uganda and others around Africa. Often the leaders have been in this business for 20 years or longer. They know what they're doing. They've done it multiple times before. So one needs to take that into account. And that applies equally, by the way, to the anti-Rwandan guerrillas, say the FDLR. They're not as dangerous as they used to be, but they're still there. And again, they have people with a lot of experience and know the terrain backwards. So they're dangerous. They're backed by Rwanda, which has a very serious army. And we know they're backed by Rwanda because, first of all, there were surface-to-air missiles deployed, not just the shoulder-launched stuff guerrillas often use, but serious stuff with a radar. That came from Rwanda. And we've seen in Goma Rwandan army personnel with their badges on their uniform. It's quite open. They're there. So really, we're up against a well-trained guerrilla force, which is backed by a very professional army. I'm not going to say Rwandan soldiers are necessarily better than ours, but they're at least as good.
Yeah, yeah. I want to touch on that theme. There's been a lot of arguments of Rwanda being actively supporting M23, and I think they've flat out denied it, even when there's so much supporting evidence of that fact. How much influence, I think direct influence, does Rwanda have in this conflict? And should South Africa be engaging Kigali maybe directly to try and de-escalate tensions, because they seem to be the wind behind the sails of M23, proverbially speaking?
Look, I think, yeah, that's probably the only thing we can really do now intelligently. The one thing that has bothered me for some time with the Congo is that most of the time, the United Nations, MONUSCO, and everybody else has ignored the fact that there are guerrilla groups in the east of the Congo aiming to topple the governments of Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi. It's Allied Democratic Forces Lord's Resistance Army up in Ituri. It's the FDLR in North Kivu. It's the former FNL, now I think it's called Red Tabara in South Kivu. Now, sure, they are not as dangerous as they used to be. And for Rwanda, perhaps also it's just an excuse, to get in and grab territory. But the reality is there are those guerrilla groups. Unless they are genuinely neutralized, you can't complain when Uganda, Rwanda, and maybe Burundi undertake external operations into the east of the Congo. Currently, Burundi actually has been doing it with the okay of the Congo government. Previously, they also allowed Uganda in. Previously, they even had an arrangement with the Rwandans to come in. But it's always fallen away. And most recently, the Congolese army actually allied itself with the FDLR, i.e. the very people who previously tried the genocide in Rwanda. Then you can't expect Kigali to sit there and watch this peacefully. I'm not saying that they're not after the minerals in the east of the Congo. A lot of people are. But they have this genuine reason that they can trot out. And we went in there, the SADC contingent went out there specifically to counter M23. So that makes us a belligerent, not a peacekeeper. We now need to find an elegant way of talking our way out of this one. But the real thing is somebody needs to sit down with the Congolese government and Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi and say, guys, how are we going to address the issue of these rebel groups from both sides? Because until you actually can address that issue effectively, those three countries do face a risk, face a threat, and they are going to take action. And even if the threat is minuscule, they will use it as an excuse to do things. So a lot of people. And maybe a final comment. I'm not sure that anybody, including Kinshasa, maybe I'm being unduly cynical, I'm not sure anybody wants stability and peace in the east of the Congo, except the poor people who live there. But then who cares about the people who live there anyway? There are so many people making so much money out of the situation in the east of the Congo the way it is. Unprofessional mining with no taxes to be paid, no health and safety regulations, no trade unions, etc. Making so much money. Why would they want it to change? And immediately everybody jumps on the bandwagon and says, yes, the United States or France. They forget, I think the biggest coltan user in the world is China.
Definitely.
I'm not saying the Chinese government is behind any of this, but some of the companies probably are, and they're certainly benefiting from it.
I want us to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to explain to our viewers, because we've been getting a lot of questions. When I announced that we'll be having this interview, and people are asking, what are our troops doing in the DRC? Who are they protecting? Is the ongoing war there affecting South Africa in any way? A lot of them are saying, why are we sending our young men and women to die in the DRC when South Africa is still relatively safe? We are not a country under war. What is this deployment all about? But we'll touch on that after the short break.
Get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath his serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, yet many children go to school hungry because of poverty. Penny Appeal South Africa's Breakfast Club aims to get a warm, hearty meal to underprivileged children so they can spend their day prospering in their schoolwork. Help feed a needy learner for only 5 Rand a day or 150 Rand a month. Or visit our website www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573 to find out how you can donate. Penny Appeal South Africa. Small change, big difference.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, buckies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name, Valley's Motor Spares.
Abu Huraira narrated that he heard the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, say, in black seed there is a healing for every disease except death. This Ramadan, experience the health benefits of this ancient blessed seed by using the Tib Black Seed range. Black seed assists the body to boost immunity, regulate blood sugar levels, reduce inflammation, and act as a potent antioxidant. Experience a holistic approach to health by introducing the Tib Black Seed range into your Ramadan routine. Available in capsules, pure cold-pressed oil, and a vapor rub. Trust Tib Health Sciences for quality black seed products. For more information, visit blackseed.co.za. Available at leading pharmacies.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Welcome back. You're still tuned in to Salam Media. The name of the show is News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidiri. Before we went on the break, we began our discussion on the SANDF's deployment out in the DRC, looking at the challenges, strategic objectives, and some regional implications of this conflict. And joining me is still independent security and defense analyst, Helmoed Römer Heitman. So we're going to dive back into the conversation. Helmoed, before we took that break, we touched a bit on, the reason why of this deployment. A lot of South Africans still have question marks. What are our troops doing in the DRC? Can you maybe unpack that a bit? I think it's been almost 20 years that the SANDF has had a presence in that part of the world. But a lot of South Africans still don't understand why.
Look, yeah, you can make a good economic and a good strategic case for it. On the economic front, simply, the DRC is a valuable export customer. The more stable and peaceful it is, the more prosperous it becomes, the more they can import from us, the more employment we have here, the more money flows into the country, the more taxes SARS generates from that. In fact, at the moment, I think exports of the DRC underpin 150,000 something jobs. And I remember a few years back, there was an analysis done. The taxes that SARS drew from the income tax of people working and making their stuff we export from the companies, etc., were substantially more than it cost us to sustain the forces we had with the UN in the Congo. So actually, South Africa Pty Limited was making a profit out of being there. More generally, we are a manufacturing economy, a trading economy. Our potentially most profitable market is sub-Saharan Africa because we are the closest manufacturing economy to it. So, no transport costs. But again, obviously, if they're unstable, if they're at war, they can't buy a lot from us. So we don't sell as much. There's your simple economic argument. Strategically, it doesn't do us any good to have a basket case in the Congo. If the East totally unraveled, it would spill over into Katanga, Kasai, which aren't very stable. And then you've got spillover into Tanzania, Zambia, and Angola. And the whole region starts unraveling a bit more. It really does. And that's, for instance, also why we deployed into the Central African Republic at the end of 2012, because the CAR has got a 1,550 kilometer river border with the Congo. And you really don't need a basket case of a failed state with that much of a river border, because once you're on the Ubangui River, you can get into a lot of the Congo by river. And who's going to notice? And in fact, that has been happening because the mission wasn't successful. And the CAR is now effectively a failed state. So essentially, we're there for strategic reasons. We want a stable region around us. And underpinning that is a simple economic consideration that the more prosperous and stable our neighborhood is, the more we can export and the better we do. It's as basic as that. There's also a factor, we want to, rephrase this, the government wants to play a role in Africa and the world, be a spokesman for Africa, etc. Then you also, as one minister, I can't remember, one of the cabinet ministers some years ago, then you also have to pay your school fees. You have to show willing to do things like this, help with disaster aid, help with emergency aid, help with peacekeeping, help with constabulary operations, for instance, suppressing piracy. Some years ago, for instance, we were asked to provide a frigate to protect ships taking food into Mogadishu in Somalia for the World Food Program, and we dodged it for a couple of years. Nobody quite knows why, but that undermined our standing. People, you want to be taken seriously, you've got to be a responsible citizen. Maybe join, in individual terms, join your neighborhood watch. Do things like that. So there are good reasons for being there. My objection to what we're doing currently is based on the fact that the mission wasn't thought through and the force is too small. And without air support, it's too ill-equipped. And to me, if you're going to deploy soldiers and put them at risk, then you do it properly. You don't go half measures. To put it differently, also, perhaps I like to say, if you're going to get involved in a knife fight, you go with a shotgun.
No,
you overmatch the other guy, and then he's not going to bother to argue with you.
There are some suggestions that a temporary withdrawal of the South African troops until better strategies and resources are in place, as you mentioned. Do you think this is a viable option? Temporarily withdrawing from the DRC until we have our house in order, so to speak.
Look, I suppose it is pretty much anything can be made viable. We're still part of MONUSCO too now. Originally, MONUSCO was going to be withdrawing, and the 5,000-man SADC force was going to be the only thing left, which, if you think about it, was imbecilic. 5,000 troops are going to achieve what 15,000 couldn't. So that was a weird notion that the SADC had. So we're still there with MONUSCO. I don't think we can easily break away from that, and probably we shouldn't. But we need to revisit what we're doing. We need to somehow come to a settlement with the situation in Goma. Question is, how do we get out of Goma? Will M23 and the Rwandans allow us to settle up and fly out of Goma airport? Not very likely at the moment. Can we hook up everything in our vehicles and drive down towards Bukavu to that airport? Or north up to beyond Beni? It's possible. We'd have to see. But very much now it is in the hands of diplomats. The soldiers have done what they can. They've been left out on a limb. They're now stuck there. Sure, we can try and break out, but and I touched on it, even with what we have today, if it was operational, we could try a proper breakout. Fly in another force down at Bukavu, move up north to create a corridor and get them out. At the moment, we can't do that. We can't even really reinforce to any good effect, so we have to talk. And then we have to clarify in our minds what we are. Are we a belligerent in this conflict, or are we a neutral party? And at the moment, I think we don't quite understand what it is we're doing.
And just in closing right now, if you were in government, if you're in the, defense ministry, and, if you were the commander-in-chief of the SANDF, which is essentially President Cyril Ramaphosa, what steps would you be taking right now, to make sure that our troops are well taken care of in the DRC? You're going to have issues of morale, which is going to be an issue because you keep losing numbers, you're under, resourced, and it seemingly you just left out to hang in a foreign country. And as you mentioned, as good and as well trained our troops are, when you don't give them the right resources, it's of no use.
Yeah, look, I mean, we don't have too much choice now. If I was running a show, I would have to phone Kigali and say, listen, this is a bit of a mess. Can we talk her out of it? I mean, it is not in Rwanda's interest to cause us massive casualties and have a sort of semi-state of war with us. I mean, we can't fight a war with each other. We're not next to each other. It's really not in Rwanda's interest, not in our interests. So let's say, okay, guys, that wasn't a good idea. Let's call it quits. Let's have a truce. Let me extract my people. I'll still stay part of MONUSCO, but the SADC mission was clearly not a good idea. Let me extract my people. That's point one. And then they know they have two tracks. Somebody, and South Africa should, because we are one of the big players in Africa. We should get together with the other big guys in Africa maybe and say, right, how are we going to resolve the issue of the Great Lakes conflict? It's got to be resolved somehow. See if we can do it seriously. It's not going to be easy. I mean, the Balkans in Europe are still not properly resolved. And that's been a couple 100 years now. So that's part one. But the other thing, the president and the cabinet need to sit down and say, okay, what role do we want to play in Africa? What defense, what military capabilities do we need for that? Then go to the defense force and say, right, if we need you to be able to do these things, what do you need? In terms of how many troops, what equipment, how much money? Now, that's what we did with the defense review. Started in 11 and finished in 15. That was based on, this is when this was Sisulu's instruction, look at what we are likely to do and what we're likely to need. Don't at this stage look at the funding. That's for the executive to decide. And the decision the committee took was to say, okay, what South Africa did through the 2000s is likely to continue, which is 3 battalion strength or reinforced battalion strength, simultaneous deployments in Africa for extended periods. Remember, we were in Burundi, DRC, and Darfur, plus the occasional smaller one like Comoros in 2006. And that whole defense review was based on that assumption. We also had added to it by President Zuma at the time that South Africa should be able to conduct an autonomous combat group level intervention by air or sea. And that's what I was referring to a bit earlier. If we could do that today, we could get our people out of there. We need to decide that. If we're going to do that, then we need to fund defense accordingly. And we need to more than double the defense budget. And, you know, people fall out of their chairs now and sputter their morning coffee. But money spent on defense isn't all just poured down the drain. It goes in salaries. People pay taxes. They buy things. Companies make money selling them stuff, also pay taxes, etc. We buy more stuff from the defense industry. It employs people. It can then export more successfully. So, in fact, you know, doubling the defense budget wouldn't actually double the total outflow. And you might even get such a major foreign currency inflow that even further oversets it. But that we've got to decide. If we're not going to spend that sort of money, then we've got to accept, okay, we are not continental or even regional power. We're maybe just a sub-regional power to be able to do something to sort out Cabo Delgado, for instance. Yeah, that we can do on, it'll still be more than we're spending on defense at the moment, but not a hell of a lot more. Or we've got to say, a pox on all your houses, we're going to go isolationist. We're going to build the fences and bunkers along our border, and the rest you can go to hell. The problem is then we also abdicate any chance of influencing events around us. And that hands it off to others. And in a period of major power competition, United States, China, Russia, etc. Not that Russia is really a major power anymore. They're a dying state, but nonetheless, you don't really want to do that because then they are going to come and play in your backyard. And you know the old story, what happens when elephants have a fight, you know, the ants down the grass get trampled. So that wouldn't be a good idea, but we really have to decide. Continental's beyond us. Regional power, sub-regional power, or isolationist. And then fund accordingly.
Definitely. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, Mr. Heitman. Thank you so much for your insights. Really, really appreciate them. And I'm sure we'll be keeping in touch as the situation in DRC unfolds. But yeah, we're going to leave it here for now. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Anytime.
There you go. That was independent security and defense analyst Helmoed Heitman. Yeah, I think making really, really important points. And I think as we close this conversation, I think we remember the brave South African soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice out in the DRC. They stood in the line of fire, not for glory, but for duty, for peace in a land so far away from home. Their courage will not be forgotten. Their sacrifice is not in vain. And may their souls rest in peace. And also their families. We hope that they find strength in knowing that a grateful nation mourns for them. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues after this.